to the Link Online. Well, hello once again. We are here back with another edition of the Link Online, and of course we are live on Facebook, and we have with us today special request Marie-Claude Simard, who is back from an adventurous trip. We'll find out a little bit more about that. Hello, Marie-Claude.
Hi, everybody.
And in from several auditions for Hollywood thrillers, we have Terry Haig.
Hi, Mark.
And Lynn Desjardins is a regular contributor, obviously. She's here with us.
Person, hi.
Obviously, hair and makeup weren't available today because it's a holiday. You see this? Look at this terrible stuff. It's a holiday because it's Good Friday. And you know why it's called Good Friday?
Because it's Friday.
That's always a good reason.
Yeah, which came first?
Apparently, I actually looked this up, and apparently good in the original sense meant a holy day. And because it's Good Friday, it was a Holy Day Friday, because it's Easter.
In French, it's fondamental the same.
Well, there you go. So anyway, coming up on the program, we have what I hope, again, is a very interesting program for you. Terry, what do you have? Levon left us something.
Levon left us a story on the just finished and rather bitter provincial election campaign in the western province of Alberta. We'll hear from the incoming premier about his priorities for the new government in the oil-rich province.
And Lynn?
I'll tell you about a lawsuit over privacy and a proposed smart city to be built in Toronto.
And with new technologies and changing demographics and other factors, what will the job market be like in 2030? I'll have that story a little bit later on. Marie-Claude, your adventure?
Yes, I'll tell you about my trip to Manawan, an indigenous community 4 hours drive from Montreal up north, and where they taught me how to make the maple syrup, the traditional Atikamekw way.
And of course, before we move on, I'd just like to say hello to listeners on World Radio Paris who carry the program. Also, Kauri 97.5 in Nigeria, and the shortwave service from Germany. All those things are coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Well, there has been a lot of controversy over the Quayside project, or Quayside project, depending on how you pronounce it. That is going to theoretically be built on 5 acres of property, hectares, which is bigger, of property on Toronto's waterfront, if it's approved. And this issue is concerning privacy, Lynn.
Yeah, absolutely. The project is promoted by Sidewalk Labs, which is a sister company of Google. You all know Google. It plans to build housing, heated sidewalks, autonomous vehicle infrastructure, and other features that it promises will make life wonderful for people who live there or go through there. However, the issue is that it would also install data collecting sensors everywhere, and extensive information would be collected and used in many ways. The Privacy Commissioner, former Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, and others have expressed grave concern about this. And now the Canadian Civil Liberties Association has launched a lawsuit. It says that 3 levels of government have given over our control of privacy issues to an unelected board and to a private company. For details, I reached Michael Bryant. He is the Executive Director and lawyer for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association.
It really gets to the fundamental question of whether you are okay having someone following you around all the time, everywhere, tracking your every movement, your preferences, your identity, the inferences that can be drawn from what you do, and not being able to just be one in a crowd, but having no privacy, not only when you're online. It's one thing when you're online and you're shopping or you're researching. It's a whole other issue when we have what amounts to public surveillance on our streets and sidewalks. And that's what's at stake here. Are people okay with constant surveillance when they're outside going about their business? It's not just about your privacy in the sense of what you're willing to share with people. It's also the feeling that you have when you go outside. Are you okay with being followed all the time, everywhere you go? And the Canadian Civil Liberties Association says you should have that privacy, number one. But if that's going to be taken away, that should be a decision made by democratically elected people, politicians. Let them make that choice so we can either vote them in or vote them out. Instead, what's happened is we've just handed the keys to the kingdom over to a company whose job it is to make money off of our identity and our data. That's what's at stake here. It's pretty fundamental. I think it's scary. And once it's understood, it's certainly something that we need to slow down, because right now we're on track to have this all happen in just a few months in Toronto with the Quayside project involving Waterfront Toronto and Google and their company called Sidewalk Labs.
What are you seeking in this lawsuit?
We're trying to reset this project. The way that the project came about was wrong. The way that it's been set up is wrong. And the way in which the project is to be finalized is wrong. It's wrong because it's unlawful. The point of having a lawful process is it does allow us as citizens in a country to say to the people who make the decisions, the politicians, I don't want you to do this, or I do want you to do this. And that's a democracy. The way it's been set up, democracy just doesn't get to work. The decision has been outsourced to a company that cannot possibly act in our public interest first. I don't think that decision should be made by Google. I think it should be made by governments. So we're fighting the federal, provincial, municipal governments here and saying, you need to take control. You need to take this project back. You need to decide what the rules are, what the privacy rules are, and where our freedom begins and ends. And you need to make a very fundamental decision about whether or not we're ever going to allow public surveillance on our streets and sidewalks.
Well, Michael Bryant went further and he asked, are governments going to let their citizens be lab rats for Google? Well, a spokesman for the Mayor of Toronto told the Globe and Mail newspaper that Sidewalk's final plan for Quayside will go through full public scrutiny for a variety of issues, including privacy. And of course, the project cannot go ahead unless it is approved by the federal, the provincial, and the municipal governments.
It all kind of smacks of Big Brother in a way to me, you know, because they.
Well, it is.
Smacks a little more than that.
Well, the thing is, if you were one of the people who lived there, everything you do is recorded.
No, it's ridiculous.
The contents of your refrigerator are recorded. What you eat, when you come and go, what you're wearing, you know, when you turn the lights on or off, the temperature of your house.
And that information is for sale to the highest bidder. And it's one thing, you know, if that doesn't make you squirm, think about what happens if you elect a government that ends up being a bit authoritarian, and they are watching everything you're doing, and there's no escaping it. And these smart cities, by the way, are popping up all over the world. And so citizens of the world should be concerned about this, not just
Well, are they
Canadians.
popping up or are they proposed?
They are some of them are further ahead than Toronto's project.
But what's the advantage? What do you mean? You sit at home like ordering an Uber car or something? You just you punch a button and the guy brings you your pizza and the guy brings you your groceries? What's the deal?
They're saying, when you drive, you know, the street lights will change according to the traffic flow, and you know, they're going to have heated sidewalks to melt the snow, and
well, that's a good idea.
That's a good idea,
but that's not watching you. That's not watching you.
Yeah.
Whereas this idea, they're watching everything you do, where you go, when you go. It's
horrible. And they've got that big place the NSA out in Utah or wherever it is, or Wyoming, that building that the U.S. government monitors every single call that's ever been made in the history of the world. Yeah. I mean, and what do the guys do though? I mean, this is no good. This is absolutely no good. Yeah. I mean, my nephew is a DA, okay, in Seattle. District attorney. Yeah. Assistant district attorney. The FBI comes in, they give a speech, they say, all you got to have to prosecute any case, just get the phone. It's going to have everything you need. And the Times, over the weekend, ran a big, long piece on Google having access to everything that we do. I mean, who's for this? Who is for this?
Well, apparently the governments think it's okay.
I'm getting shrill. I don't know.
I don't understand why you. I kind of agree with this guy. Why do you want to hand over this to a private company? It
Why
sounds
hand it
like
over to anybody?
it's dystopian in a way, you know.
Totally dystopian.
Anyway,
Sorry, I'm getting
we can
carried
keep
away.
going with this for a long time. We have to move on. We're going to be talking about Canada's the election in the Western province of Alberta in just a moment.
Okay, I'm going to try to stay calm. My voice is going up 8 octaves with this, but anyway, okay.
Now
Well,
here's
all right, here we
Terry
go. We're
in
the
a-
announcer.
in a zen mood.
I'm Mark Montgomery.
No, you're
okay.
not.
Canada's western province of Alberta has a new government. The United Conservative Party won a landslide victory on Tuesday, and its leader, Jason Kenney, will become Alberta's next premier once he is sworn in on April 30th. Now, once Canada's richest province, Alberta has fallen on hard times recently. The drop in global oil prices in 2014 hit the province hard. Energy companies have cut down production. Unemployment is high compared to previous years. They're having a great time out there, okay? But their team is in the playoffs, okay? And to compound it all, Alberta has struggled to get its oil to international markets. Aha, that's going to be a big one coming up in June. There is a shortage of pipelines. That means Alberta is forced to sell its oil to U.S. refineries at discount prices. Yeah, and of course, the Alberta companies are owned by U.S. companies to begin with. So, okay, on Wednesday, Premier-designate Kenney presented his legislative priorities to get Alberta, stop me if you've heard this one, working again.
So Bill number 1 in that legislature session will be the Carbon Tax Repeal Act. Bill number 2 will be the Open for Business Act. We will also pass the first installment of the job creation tax cut in that first session of the legislature, part of a plan that will create at least 55,000 new full-time private sector jobs. We will also begin implementing immediately our red tape reduction action plan to move Alberta from the most overregulated and slowest moving economy in Canada to one of the fastest moving and freest economies in all of North America. Later this week, I will be meeting with Indigenous leaders from across Canada to deepen the commitment on which we ran to ensure that our First Nations people are real partners in prosperity, particularly in the responsible development of our resources. Today I've also already been in discussions with business leaders in Alberta and others outside of this province who are deeply interested in investing more in this province with a government that will welcome that investment, that will make us the most competitive and desirable place in Canada in which to create jobs. So I restate what I've said last night and over the last 4 weeks. For those Albertans who have been anxious about their economic future, whose incomes have been cut, who have lost their jobs, their homes, or their hope. For all of those Albertans, hope is on the way. A government that will be obsessed with job creation and economic growth, with getting a fair deal for Alberta in the Canadian Federation. We're already off to a great start, and I can't wait for the days that are yet to come, brighter days for the people of Alberta.
That was Alberta's Premier-designate Jason Kenney. Many analysts say that these policies will put him on a collision course with the Liberal government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Ottawa. But Kenney is also threatening to turn off the energy taps for British Columbia. The two western provinces have been at loggerheads for years now because British Columbia wants to block the expansion of a controversial oil pipeline. That's going to play out more in June. More hearings on that. There might be a decision made in June about that pipeline.
This is the Trans Mountain pipeline that goes from the oil fields over the Rocky
Burnaby.
Mountains across British Columbia to the Pacific.
To ship oil out. But, you know, there are real conservation worries about that on the part of the British Columbia government. They're quite green and left-leaning. I think what's fascinating about this is that, Jason Kenney, this premier-elect of Alberta, used to be in the former Conservative government and has federal government, and has positioned himself against the current Liberal government of Justin Trudeau, who is up for election in October. So there's going to be this war going on that is going to make life really quite interesting. And as we know, there are 4 provinces that are refusing to go with the climate project of carbon reduction. So the federal government imposed a carbon tax on them, and that is now actually going to court on jurisdictional grounds. The provinces are saying, oh no, you can't do this. This is our jurisdiction. Federal government can. It'll be interesting to see what the courts say. It will be very interesting to see what the Canadian public says. Are they buying into, yes, we need to deal with climate change, or we really need to promote our oil sector, which is really a fundamental part of not just Alberta's economy, but the Canadian economy.
Part of this is that a lot of people say, yes, we need to deal with climate change, but this tax isn't the way to do it. So that also
carbon
figures.
tax, you mean?
Yeah, a lot of people say that, but we have the example of British Columbia, which has had a carbon tax for a decade, and it has not hurt their economy. It has greatly reduced their emissions.
Oh, I don't know about that last one, though. I've seen other reports that say, in fact, it did initially, as people were shocked by the increase in fuel prices, but as they got used to it, consumption went back up. I'm not completely sure where the statistics are on that, so I wouldn't.
Oh, it's going to be something that will be discussed
But I did a story
ad nauseum in the next few months right through the campaign.
Well, see, this is another thing, because I just did a story about the Saskatchewan farmers who calculated their costs because of this, because everybody's concerned about the cost of how much it's going to increase the cost of car fuel for their personal cars. But in fact, the tax goes across a wide spectrum, from home heating to transport of everything. I mean, face it, when the oil prices were high last time, even Canada Post, who delivers your mail, began charging a surtax on mail delivery because of the extra cost they were paying for fuel. So this affects everything, including the cost of groceries and everything.
Yeah, but the
Canadian,
the Canadian government has said they are going to return that money on people's income tax.
Yeah, but this isn't.
And they're going to have even more than what?
How do you do that? How do you collect? For example, I think the figure was like a family might pay $280 in extra tax, but the federal government is going to give them back like $320. So I'm going, how do you do that? How do you collect a certain amount to theoretically change people's habits and then give them more back? Where does the extra money come from? It's very confusing. I'm not clear on that concept.
But it's getting completely out of hand. I mean, go pay $5.59 for 5 stalks of celery, man. I mean, groceries are now beyond the pale.
I saw a sad-looking head of lettuce.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
for $4.
Yeah, no. I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, gee.
I don't know what's going to happen. They're
that
getting shrill again.
Well, let me say this.
I am more worried about climate change right now.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Take the big issue, the macro issue, Deja.
Well, let me say
Look
this.
at flooding. We have terrible flooding right now in the province of Quebec. And
No, if we don't get it right, our grandchildren aren't going to have any place to live, ladies and gentlemen.
Children, never mind grandchildren.
All right, yeah,
it's
because
happening.
the UN said 2030, right? Point of no return?
Yep.
2050, I think.
No, 2030.
2030.
Yeah.
Well, that
And
brings up an
Canada.
interesting point, because I want to move on to another thing about how the world is changing. And it
segue.
seems to be changing more and more quickly. And people in schools who are orienting themselves towards certain job career now may find that by the time they graduate, those career opportunities have changed rather radically. And there's been a new study that takes a first look at the potential job market in Canada and the factors that can
I saw
affect
that story,
jobs in the future. Now, I spoke with Jessica Thornton. She is the lead author of that study and senior project designer at the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Ryerson University in Toronto. And in this segment, she noted that technological changes were, of course, big drivers of job market changes in the future, but not the only one.
What we were really trying to do with this report is push people to think beyond. So, for instance, when we think about environmental sustainability. What could the impact of resource scarcity have? For sectors that are currently quite reliant on natural resources, what would their future look like if that becomes a challenge? Similarly, wildfires, flooding, and mudslides, if they increase in instances across Canada, which they really are starting to see some evidence of that, what will that mean for the need of municipalities to have access to disaster relief infrastructure and whatnot? And then looking at demographic change, in Canada we have an aging population. And so what we were looking at is what does that mean for working retirement? What does that mean for the fact that many Canadians are continuing to work past the traditional retirement age, and what might that mean for the future of work and seeing multi-generations working together in the workplace? Similarly, what might it mean for another trend we looked at around lifelong learning, the idea that education no longer finishes when you're in your early 20s, but potentially is something you do throughout your entire lifetime as you adapt to different careers that you might have.
Is this part of the idea that people no longer will have just one career, but probably change careers possibly several times during their working life?
Exactly. Or even potentially have multiple careers at once. One of our trends that we call work-life integration is looking at how our professional and personal lives are melding, but it's also sort of seeing some people are opting to have multiple employers, maybe trying out a few different careers at once as a way to choose their own adventure in terms of how they want their professional life to play out.
Now, there has been an idea that young people want this gig economy where they're shifting from one job to another and possibly, as you say, holding down a couple of different jobs at the same time. Is that something people actually want, or is that something that's being forced upon them by these changes that you mention?
That's a great question, and I think something that we didn't look at too specifically with this work, though the Brookfield Institute broadly is interested in this question. I think one of the things we were interested in understanding is with this idea of, working and your work life and your professional life melding and, it requiring you to be potentially more connected, more online every day, what that sort of brings into play one of our counter trends that we looked at, which is this idea around digital detox. And the idea that more and more people are seeking time away from being online. And so we've seen in France, for instance, they've now given workers the right to not be connected to work email during non-work hours. And so this very much, I think, connects to one of our other trends, which we call connected but lonely, which is looking at how mental illness is increasing in being a challenge as we've seen more and more use of technological connectedness. So, people have been never more connected than ever, but yet we're seeing increase in feeling of loneliness, especially among people aged 16 to 24. And so I think there's definitely a bit of tension around this idea of, using the gig economy, the on-demand economy, and needing to be online all the time, as well as some of the implications that it might have on health and well-being.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Jessica Thornton, lead author of the study of the future of the job market by 2030. And she is senior project designer at the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Ryerson University in Montreal. Now, Marie-Claude, it's time to turn things over to you and your wonderful...
Toronto, Ryerson University.
What did I say?
Montreal.
Really? Yeah. Oh, well, that's not right. No,
The coffee bar's closed because it's a holiday, so he's not thinking
Ryerson
straight.
University in Toronto.
You're in charge, thank you.
Now on to Marie-Claude and her wonderful adventure. What's going on?
Yes, well, April is the best time to talk about maple syrup. And I thought this year would be great to go in an indigenous community where, indigenous people taught, the Europeans when they came how to make maple syrup. They invented the process of transforming maple water or maple sap into maple syrup. So I went in the Atikamekw community of Manawan. The Atikamekws are one of the 11 nations of the province of Quebec. And it's really part of their tradition. And I went on in two sites. One that's for the schools in Manawan where they learn about the tradition. And I went in the real ancestral site in the middle of the woods. We went there with the snowmobiles. And this is what they call the the maple, tente à sucre, sugar tent, like
Sugar shack in English.
yeah, but tent.
It's a tent.
It's a tent because yeah.
You say tent. I say.
Of course. So before I say any more, I prepared a little video of.
Cool.
I was there with my colleague, our colleague Anne-Marie Yvon from Espace Autochtone. So here we go. So
All right, let's see your adventure in
Yeah.
northern
Roll it.
Quebec.
Jimmy, where are we?
So we are in Manawan in an economic territory. As long as I can remember, our land, this is our land, and we never give it up, never sold it.
Okay.
So we're continuing our traditional way to how to make our maple syrup
Oh,
with all my friends Patrice, Jan, and Shane, and Ibinek. This is the maple syrup which is boiling right now. They're
okay.
trying to make it boil at the right temperature, so it's going to become a syrup maple.
And there's the
Well,
first
there you go.
product.
So,
Wow.
and look what I have here. Now, this maple syrup has a very special taste. That's why I wanted you to taste it. You'll see a difference right away because since they cook it on the fire, the first stage was that big boiling pan that you saw. They do the first boiling there, but when it's not yet maple syrup, they transport it to a much smaller pot where they cook it on the
Open fire.
yeah, and then they use special maple wood that gives they give with the smoke gives it that smoky taste and that and you know, so I think let me know what you think. It's here we go. So each family there, not each family, but a lot of families have their own family site, and they at this time of the year they go there outside the village, and they.
Now you have to mention that the maple syrup only flows for a very short period at this time of year when the temperature, and it's best when the temperature is a couple of degrees above freezing in the daytime and a couple of degrees below freezing at night. And I noticed that they were doing it in the traditional kind of way there, where they had the buckets on the tree, because now the commercial ones, they all have plastic lines running from the tree back to the center house, so they don't collect it anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, we should mention how, for the audience that doesn't know, they're little spouts that you hammer into the tree.
Amazing.
Yes, I know. It's
This tastes very different from your regular maple
and
syrup.
They've been considering of maybe commercializing it eventually, but they don't want to do it because they know the taste was the first thing that's going to go, because you really need to do it the traditional way.
By hand. It's got a really special taste. You can taste the wood smoke.
The maple wood.
Exactly. So, by the way, the music that I used was there was actually two guys playing there and stuff. I actually recorded them.
Wow.
They're actually part of a famous group called the Black Bears that made recordings and won Juno awards.
How
So,
cool is that?
yeah.
No, you were in an artistic frame of mind as you shot that. There were all sorts of
Well, I would say that very good.
fancy
this
shots.
morning,
Fancy
so-
shots. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
you are an
definitely.
artist.
It definitely has a different taste
Yeah.
than the commercial ones that we
Yeah,
get.
and they use it in. They don't have a specific dish that they make with this, but they use it, with their meats and like we use sugar basically. But also they make tea that they use the maple water instead of regular water. That's already good, and they put some of that maple syrup in it, and that's the best tea I've
Well, I
I've
just
ever
want
had.
to take a moment to thank
Yeah.
everybody for joining us today. Marie-Claude Simard, Terry Haig, Lynn Desjardins, I'm Mark Montgomery, and also in the other room there, they're handling the technical aspect of things, Marc-André Deschamps and Maxime Lebris, and of course, Pierre Dutil, who has apparently hidden the Easter egg somewhere. We haven't been able to find
We're
it.
having a hunt after.
He's,
Heavyweight champion of Augusta, Georgia.
he's hidden the Easter egg somewhere. I don't know where.
Dutil,
Wow.
a 2 handicap he has.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching from Hollywood today, this, of course, is Terry Haig. He's available for any of your Hollywood feature
That's
films.
right, that's
Contact his agent. That's all the time we have for the program for today. So listen, thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.